it was Journal of American Medical Association. It was Journal of American Medical Association.
Journal of American Medical Association.
As most of you know, red meat kills. Processed red meat kills you faster. And it's actually been on the World Health Organization's carcinogen list, okay? Processed red meat. Well, it turns out that in that study, eggs caused more cancer than processed red meat. So I hope everybody sees that. You know, I always tease, and I'll try not to say it again tomorrow, that it was published in a vegan propaganda journal. No, it was Journal of American Medical Association.
You've been clear about eating a whole food plant-based diet, but would it be such a big deal if we just ate eggs? You know, maybe we had like, you know, an egg every morning. Or, you know, is that a big deal? Is that like beef and chicken and cheese and fish? Like, is eggs okay?
So to turn a phrase, and I don't want to steal everything from my presentation tomorrow, but you know, I would say, what came worse, the chicken or the egg? Okay, okay. So as it turns out, I think a lot of us were shocked to find that you could have a substance with zero cholesterol, not saturated fat, and that would be egg whites, and that somehow would be impugning health. Because we thought that the egg yolk had all the cholesterol and that was leading to plaque, et cetera. So a couple of articles. One talked about IGF-1, which is associated with development of diabetes, cancer, heart attack, stroke, death. Actually does occur with any kind of animal protein. And so having a concentration of animal protein, and the protein is not that great in egg whites anyway, but I'm not going to give away the quiz questions for tomorrow about how much it is. But then the other side of it was in 2016, and I will go over this tomorrow in detail because you have to have this emblazed in your brain, the graph that talks about hazard ratio of animal versus vegetable and which type of death, that is other, cancer, heart disease, or all-cause, which one of them is not associated with increased death. And the only answer was dairy causing cancer. Now, some people would argue with that. Well, just do another study with another few 100,000 patients followed for a long period of time, and you could refute that. But as most of you know, red meat kills. Processed red meat kills you faster. And it's actually been on the World Health Organization's carcinogen list, okay? Processed red meat. Well, it turns out that in that study, eggs caused more cancer than processed red meat. So I hope everybody sees that. You know, I always tease, and I'll try not to say it again tomorrow, that it was published in a vegan propaganda journal. It was Journal of American Medical Association. So it's very well peer-reviewed, very large study. It was nurses' health and physician health to put together. And so this data is actually very convincing that no one should eat any animal product whatsoever unless you are immune from heart disease and other kinds of death, and then you should eat dairy. Yeah, okay.
We were just chatting, S and I, on it.
Was that in October of 2015? Where eggs are worse than the red meat, because they put it in the same category of carcinogenicity as smoking. Yeah, eggs are in the same level of carcinogenicity as smoking.
About 20 years ago, I had to go back and actually collect these data again and find these papers. But I recall when I wrote a brief review on this some years ago, 4 studies showing that eggs were significantly associated with increased risk for colon cancer in particular. That was some years ago. Quite striking, actually.
Can I make one more comment on this? Because I did spend a fair amount of my presidency fighting this issue. It was mind-boggling that the 2015 dietary guidelines for the United States came out, and they said that cholesterol was no longer a nutrient of concern. You could eat as much as you want. And the references were two. One was our guidelines, American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association, which was completely not true. It was a complete misrepresentation, them quoting us saying that, that eggs were not associated with any adverse outcome. What we were actually saying is that we need modern studies that look specifically at cholesterol ingestion and the effect on cholesterol. Well, it turns out that even that was misguided again, and it had missed a few things, and I've sent it all to Bob Eckel, and they would never say that again. But even so, it was misquoted. The other one was even more interesting. It was a study, a meta-analysis, by meaning that they took a whole bunch of studies and put them together, and you had to have one of these two criteria, that is a population with less than 1 or 0 eggs per week versus 7 or more eggs per week. And if you followed those people for 5 years, you didn't see much in the way of heart disease. So they concluded that it was fine. And of course, anybody in the room would include that, I think we want people to live more than 5 years. Okay. So anyway, that was the beginning of the abstract. Apparently the people who put together your United States guidelines did not read the rest of the abstract, where it said that if you are eating these regularly, it increases your diabetes rate by about 42%, but if you were a diabetic, it increased your cardiovascular disease rate by 69%. And how they could ignore that and say, it's mind-boggling, except for one thing. The committee was apparently infiltrated by the Egg Board. And that's a hard thing to fight, but we did fight it. Multiple meetings with USDA, went to Health and Human Services, went to the FDA, went to everyone who would listen with our message, with a lot of help from Neil Barnard, who's actually there in Washington, D.C. And we got it changed. And so the guidelines did come out with the statement. That's right. Right. It now quotes the Institute of Medicine, another vegan propaganda group? No, it's the Institute of Medicine. And it's the statement from their 2001 publication says people should eat as little cholesterol as possible, which of course is 0, which means everybody should be a vegan.
Use the microphone.
Why is the USDA the one that's given the responsibility to make the food plate or the food pyramid? Because everybody in the USDA was an officer in the cattle industry, the pork board, the egg board, the Dairymen's Association. That doesn't work.
You would think that they're interested in food, but the Department of Agriculture, that's the branch that is tasked with this, they alternate. They work on it each time, but they alternate who's in charge, Health and Human Services versus the USDA. And so, they were actually very receptive, and they listened, and ultimately did make the change, but you had to bring them a massive amount of literature.
Why do we always have to listen to the Institute of Medicine, by the way? Because in 2002, when those dietary guidelines came out at that time, they came to the range idea. Instead of just RDAs or RDIs, if you will, they started developing ranges. A little bit before that, but using ranges. So the range said to be safe for protein consumption as a percent of total calories. Okay. Went up to 35%. In other words, it's safe to consume a diet, mostly from animal foods, with a range of protein intake up to 35%. And it so happens the chairman of that board at the time was the most significant consultant for the dairy industry in the world.
Wow.
And so that has caused so much mischief. Institute of Medicine, and I've been on those panels too myself. And so I would argue that, maybe going back to what you had said, Hess, that some of these government bodies, who sort of establish guidelines, if you will, they're not all right.
Yep.
And so I'm really troubled by what the Institute of Medicine has done over the years.
Oh, I agree. We shouldn't have to go and have multiple meetings to get something fixed that's evidence-based. And that old saying, never attribute to malice what's easily attributable to ignorance, okay? But that only goes so far in this area. This area is what's attributable to money. And the financial interests are run very deep, and it's very difficult to go up against them, but we have to keep going.